of you in more easternly time zones. So this is a talk about the adoption of your social intranet, right? Sounds fantastic. But before we get into that, I'd like you all to do something for me. It's a bit of a webinar warm-up technique, and that is, be spontaneous. Okay, that's right. I'd like you to be spontaneous. I'll give you a few seconds. I know it's a bit early. All right, you feeling spontaneous? How's that spontaneity doing? Is it overflowing? Maybe you can tweet me at Gordon R if you come up with something really good. Okay. All right, time's up. Well, I hope that was as awkward for you as it was for me. And there's kind of a reason for my awkward-inducing introduction to this talk, and it has a lot to do with user adoption of the social intranet. I believe that asking people to be spontaneous is what a lot of organizations are trying to do when they seek to drive adoption to their intranet, right? And driving adoption, by the way, has to be one of my least favorite expressions in all of intranet talk because, well, it reminds me of this, driving cattle, or at least herding cattle. And of course, for those of you on the line, many of you who manage social intranets, you know it's a lot less like this and a whole lot more like this. I don't know if you remember this ad EDS launched it at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago about herding cats, and I think intranets are a lot more like herding cats. You should go type in herding cats into YouTube and find that if you haven't seen it before. It's fantastic. So asking people to be spontaneous is essentially what we're doing when we're issuing these commands, right? Be social, share knowledge, communicate, collaborate. And asking people to do this, we actually take away some of the conditions, or really most of the conditions in the case of this sort of spontaneity, for it to happen. And it's actually called a spontaneity paradox. So by asking you to be spontaneous, I just made it impossible for you to be spontaneous. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So I'd like you to keep that in mind as we go through the webinar today. I'm hoping that we can understand some different ways of thinking about user adoption that doesn't put ourselves and our social intranet users into this kind of double bind of having to, share knowledge and be social and be spontaneous because they've been asked to. So this is a talk about encouraging user adoption of your intranet. So first and foremost, I think it's important that we understand what we're talking about here anyways, right? So what is adoption anyways? So generally, when we're speaking about user adoption of the social intranet, we're talking about some kind of measure of the total number of users of your social intranet, often represented as a percentage of the total number of possible users in our organization. We often refer to that usage also over a period of time, introducing some sort of notion of frequency and repeated usage, and it results in charts and graphs that look like this one. So this is percentage staff logging on weekly to a social intranet between March 2010 and February 2011. This is in fact Mountain Equipment Co-op, one of our clients here locally and based in Vancouver with retail locations all across Canada. They're like the REI of Canada, as it were. And this is actually their user adoption graph, and it's a phenomenal one. They maintain a very high rate in the high 80s and low 90s of staff that use their intranet once a week, right? And we love these graphs. So we believe that an intranet manager equipped with the right tools should be able to answer the question, do you know how many people are using your intranet, and how often, or with what frequency? But there's another part to this definition that's required as well too, and that's the usage itself, right? So what exactly are we trying to get them to adopt? How do we define usage? Now, we believe this is dependent entirely on what your intranet does, and we've seen many of our clients' intranets from Mountain Equipment Co-op to, online matchmaking companies, to design firms, to law firms, to 100-year-old lime mining firms. And all of you on this webinar today, your intranets are all actually really quite different, even though you're using the same software. So usage is contextual. It depends entirely on your organization's goals and the intranet's purpose. So when it comes to defining usage, if you know us well, you know that we're big fans of James Robertson, Step 2 in Australia, and you've probably heard us talk about his 5 purposes. There's a link in this slide to a presentation that he did a few years ago where it was only 4 purposes, and then he snuck in the 5th, which is culture, at a talk at KM World in DC in 2010 that I was at. But the result is, which the culture is kind of the result of all these purposes. So we have content, communication, collaboration, activity, and culture. And so while everyone's intranet is different, we think these are some great foundational concepts to start with. So as we go through some of the possible types of things your users could be doing on your intranet, you can think about which purpose these align with. So if we take this is a bit busy, this slide, but if we take a look at some of the possible use cases or tasks or activities, if finding and reading important HR policy material, perhaps a content type purpose, right? Keeping up to date by reading company news articles, sounds like a communications purpose. Learning about corporate events happening next month, creating project status update for team members, finding experts, participating in community discussion, submitting employee expenses, an activity purpose there down at the bottom, right? I mean, all of these types of things, again, somewhat generic, but you can imagine these in your organization. You can imagine the specific ones too. That second one on this slide, commenting on the company foodie blog about the latest restaurant in town. There's a common use case here in our office and our use of Thought Farmer. If you're not familiar with that, we have a very active and hungry staff here, and they love writing blog posts about the latest restaurant that they found. So. And the list goes on. So the point here is that there are many behaviors that we want to encourage on the intranet, right? And while similar, they're going to differ company to company depending on what your priority is and how you see yourself using the intranet. So we think the lenses of content, communication, collaboration, activity, and the resulting culture is a great starting point. So now we should have, hopefully, a good handle on adoption, so some sort of measure of usage over time, and some notions of what usage means in your organization. So this seems fairly easy to understand, right? We just need to know how to increase that graph, upwards and to the right. So, and this might not sound all that different than measuring and understanding the adoption of any other IT-powered system that we've deployed in the past, right? Like these fine, lovely IT systems here. So, is it really that different? Like, why are we having this webinar, right? Well, we believe that social intranets, of course, are different in that they represent a system of engagement and not simply a system of record. So these terms were written about by Jeffrey Moore. He's the author of Crossing the Chasm and many other books about technology adoption, in a great AIM-sponsored white paper that you can download online that was released a couple of years ago. And in that white paper, he points out the differences between the two types of systems. And this table shows sort of the consideration, the system of record, and the system of engagement, and sort of the focus of each, right? And I think this first one, there's quite a bit to read here, and I recommend that you go and download the white paper. But I want to bring to attention the first, and I think sort of most fundamental part of this, is that the focus of a system of record, a classic enterprise content management system or some sort of data collection and reporting system, is really all about the transaction, right? In a system of record, you're transacting with records and data. But in a system of engagement, you're interacting with people, right? Therefore, there's a social dynamic. That's why we call it a social intranet after all, right? And so not all technologies have as strong a social dynamic, and it's that social dynamic that leads to this ongoing discussion and webinars like this about user adoption. So here's another quote. This is a quote from Michael Krigsman. He writes about IT project failure on ZDNet, great blogger, great writer. So although geeky eggheads may become enamored by cool technology, real users care about solving practical, day-to-day business problems. We call that adoption. Stated differently, satisfied users adopt. Those who do not experience sufficient value walk away. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. Walk away, right? Well, yeah, he's right. Your employees will walk away if they don't experience sufficient value. Because if it was mandatory, after all, this would be the world's most boring webinar. I mean, really, we wouldn't need to, it wouldn't make any sense to do a webinar on user adoption if we were talking about intranet that everyone was forced to use, right? Usage would be guaranteed, and that would be the end of the story. But these certain beneficial behaviors that we hope to encourage and spread throughout the organization are not mandatory, right? They can't be proceduralized, and they aren't guaranteed through the installation of any piece of software, even ours. So, in fact, they're totally opposite, right? They're voluntary. They are spontaneous, and when they happen, they bring this lovely sort of serendipitous benefit, right? We can't predict what will happen ahead of time, but we'll certainly recognize success when it happens, which makes it really tricky for you, right? The intranet manager or communications manager or knowledge manager who was just told, to just go and make it happen, or whatever instructions your boss or the CIO has given you with this, nifty social intranet technology. So what's the benefit of all this spontaneous, unpredictable, voluntary adoption anyhow, right? We're taking for granted it's good, but really, sort of what's the business case? Well, I think this is important to discuss quickly, and it might seem obvious to some on the call, but it's quite profound, and I think worth a little time taking aside here to talk about. And that's, first off, we believe it's how you directly relate sort of the problem of the intranet, or think about what the intranet is. And we believe that your social intranet is an explicit manifestation of your company's communication and collaboration network, right? It's a living, breathing system that's complex, that learns, and is made up of the dynamic relationship between your employees and all of their interactions. Like, it's a network. And when you think of it like a network, it's this dynamic, pulsating thing, and not as some fixed, static collection of pages that live on a server, you can ask yourself questions like, well, what's the value of this network to our organization? And how would we, go about measuring that? So, this visualization that I've got going on the screen right now is how a certain type of network forms. And challenge you to think about your intranet like this. We don't currently have a tool that allows you to see your intranet like this, but what if you could? So we looked into this very question back in 2009 when Brian Robertson, there we go, Brian Robertson wrote a great blog post on our site, and the punchline is that while the adoption of technology through a network might be measured in linear terms, right? So, we had 100 people last month, and now we've got 110 people this month, like Mountain Equipment Co-op's graph. The value of the interactions that network produces actually grows at exponential or non-linear rates. So said another way, if you had 10 people, the benefit isn't just last month's value of your network plus 10. It might be something like x squared, or 2 to the n, where n is the total number of people in your network, right? So Brian's post outlines some of the various nonlinear models that get applied to evaluating network interactions, like the Zipf's law and Reed's law and some others. In that post, though, we like Beckstrom's law the most out of this, and Beckstrom's law mathematically, for all of you math fans in the house, it looks like this. In English, it's stated something like this, which says the value of a network equals the net value added to each user's transactions conducted through that network, valued from the perspective of each user, and sum for all. So really simplified, I recommend go back and read the blog post again, but really simplified, increased users in your system is okay, but obviously increased usage is a lot better, and usage, as we already talked about, will have different value both individually for your users and your organization as a whole. So, all right, enough with all the theory. How do we make this adoption happen, Gord? Come on, let's cut to the chase here. So when listening to our clients talk about getting their employees motivated to use the intranet, there always seems to be just a variation of the two famous levers, right? So some of our fantastic new artwork for our new website. There's the carrot and the stick. And the carrot says, go to the intranet because we'll give you something nice and fun. And the stick says, go there because it's mandatory. And if you don't, we'll fire you, or some variation on those two themes, right? But actually, the carrot and the stick are really just the same thing, right? And that is that they're an appeal to what's known as an extrinsic model of motivation. And an extrinsic model of motivation basically says, do this and you'll get that, or you'll avoid getting that, where that's a really bad thing. So definition of extrinsic motivation, it refers to the performance of an activity in order to attain an outcome. Common extrinsic motivations are rewards like money and grades, right? But also coercion and threat of punishment. That's the kind of the bad side. So carrots and sticks, while great, don't address this other type of motivation, the flip side of extrinsic motivation, which is intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation defined refers to motivation that's driven by an interest or enjoyment in the task itself and exists within the individual rather than relying on external pressure. So this topic of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation is covered really well in this book, Drive, Dan Pink. For those of you who haven't seen it, I suggest you look at it, and he's got a great 20-minute TED Talk on this subject, which has been viewed some 3.1 million times. I'm sure that's done a great thing for his book sale. And what's interesting about this is that extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, they both have their place in the world, right? One isn't right and the other isn't wrong, but you just need to know when to use them. So incentives, or an appeal to extrinsic motivation, can be really effective if you're incenting the right type of task. In the first chapter of the book, Pink talks about two types of activities and how these relate to the two models of motivation. So these activities are algorithmic and heuristic tasks. So in his own words, an algorithmic task is one in which you follow a set of established instructions down to a single pathway to one conclusion. A heuristic task is the opposite. Precisely because no algorithm exists for it, you have to experiment with possibilities and devise a novel solution. So he goes on to use the example. He says, working as a grocery checkout clerk is mostly algorithmic. You pretty much do the same thing over and over again a certain way. But creating an ad campaign is mostly heuristic. You have to come up with something new. So when is the carrot and stick approach to the social intranet adoption okay? Well, following Dan Pink's lead, I'd say that we're talking about algorithmic tasks and things where there's some sort of mandatory task in place. I believe it's okay. So this falls into things like the activity purpose, where mandatory routine interactions with systems of record are involved, maybe timesheets or payrolls, some of your HRIS systems or CRM tools or other of these sort of data collection and reporting systems. Likewise, some basic content tasks, I believe, fall into this category too, where consumption of static information or policy material is the goal. So I'll give you a couple examples. So this is IDEO's screen. This is from their intranet launch a couple of years ago now. IDEO never really launched their intranet in the way that many have a big launch party. Instead, they built it up, they added some great content to it, and then they sent out an email to staff about a particular piece of content. And that content was their compensation policy that had just changed. And the result was that a ton of staff went there to take a look at it. Now, everyone was interested in the compensation policy, and when the users got there, they looked around the intranet and saw this other tasty carrot-like content that had been put on the intranet, and they received some significant lift in the overall adoption and usage of their intranet. There's a little, Gentry Underwood at the time had a graph of increased usage, and there's like a little inflection point in the graph where you can see that it spiked up, right? The velocity of adoption changed at that point when people went there and saw it. Another example of perhaps more mandatory or stick-like approach comes from Mountain Equipment Co-op. Now, MEC shared this with us at the Social Intranet Summit about their work around adoption. They put their shift worker schedules online, so all their retail staff that work in all their stores work shifts, and they have to find out what their schedules are. This is a mandatory piece of information that you need to know as a retail worker at the co-op, like when am I working next week? And they also took away the other options for getting this information. The intranet was the only place. You had to go there, right? So that sounds great for getting people to use the intranet. Put one of the most important bits of content that your staff care about there. That was great, but the problem that they shared with us at SISV was that they did it before people could get access from home. And that's since been changed, but it's a reminder to you before you start making all these mandatory bits of information live on your intranet. A mandatory task plus limited or no access for the employee looking for that information equals a high degree of frustration, something not to duplicate. So great idea, some challenges in the implementation side. Of course, they learned from that. Mondo, their intranet, is now available from home, and the adoption chart, which we saw at the beginning, is truly remarkable. So when is it not okay to use carrot and sticks? Well, if we go back to our two types of tasks, it's probably not good to use carrot and sticks for all the stuff that makes your intranet inherently social. So when you're dealing with these heuristic tasks, right, those that involve uncertainty, creativity, novelty, They require dialogue, knowledge sharing, some sort of exploration or experimentation with others. And this takes us back again to the voluntary aspect and Krigsman's quote that we saw at the beginning of this presentation. Right? Stated differently, satisfied users adopt, and those who do not experience sufficient value walk away. Again, they're going to walk away because usage is voluntary. If they don't want to, they don't have to. We hope that they will, but we can't make them. This is directly in line with a one-liner from Dave Snowden, a quote that I love and I think really gets to the heart of this, which is, knowledge can only be volunteered. It cannot be conscripted. So we sincerely hope that you're benefiting from from using your intranet for more than just sort of simply the mandatory tasks, right? We do hope that you're benefiting from your staff communicating, sharing knowledge, and collaborating in a more sort of freely and open fashion. And that requires volunteering, right, or being spontaneous. And because, again, I'll say it again, it's those voluntary interactions that are the things that provide the non-linear growth of the value of your intranet. That's where all this network effect talk comes in. That's where it truly lies, right? It's why you're running a social intranet and not just some sort of classic few-to-many content management system. So what's the conclusion? Is my iPad giveaway a dumb idea, Gord? Well, no. What I'm actually going to suggest here is that while you might want to drive adoption, what you're actually trying to do is stimulate the diffusion of innovation inside your organization. That sounds like a big fancy expression, but that innovation is your social intranet and all of its associated interactions. So let's rephrase the question. How do I stimulate the diffusion of innovation inside my organization? Because perhaps that's what this webinar should have perhaps been more accurately titled. Now, we have to thank Everett Rogers in this book from the 1960s and his work on how technology spreads in organizations. It's a big book. It's apparently quite boring. I've flipped through it a couple of times and put it down again and flipped through it a couple of times and put it down again. I haven't read the whole thing. But there are some tasty bits from inside this book I'm hoping that you can learn from. And the tastiest stuff of all is he identifies 5 factors or characteristics of innovation that influence an individual's decision to adopt or reject that innovation. And these are the 5 factors. The first is relative advantage, and that's how improved the innovation is over the previous generation. So you can think about how your intranet competes against a previous intranet. Compatibility, the level of compatibility that an innovation has to be assimilated into the individual's life. Just simply how well does it fit into my way of doing things. Complexity or simplicity, if the innovation is too difficult to use, an individual will not likely adopt it. Ease of use, clearly I think that's an easy one to understand. Trialability, this is an interesting one, how easily an innovation may be experimented with as it is being adopted. If a user has a hard time using it and trying an innovation, this individual will be less likely to adopt it. This is really kicking the tires, right? And kind of coming to a safe place with it. Observability, the extent to which an innovation is visible to others. So an innovation that's more visible will drive communication among the individual's peers and personal networks and will in turn create a more positive or negative reaction. So let's make this a bit more specific and just kind of walk through these from an intranet perspective, right? Relative advantage, again, your new intranet versus the old intranet, or quite frankly, the competition, right? The competition might not be the old intranet. It might be email, it might be face-to-face meetings, it might be a corporate newsletter that everyone loves to read. So ask yourself, what can your social intranet do that nothing else can do, right? Accentuate the positive. Market your intranet, communicate its value, right? Demonstrate the great things that you can do with it. Another strategy which sort of Mountain Equipment took with this relative advantage was they took away the other system. They took away there was no relative advantage because they got rid of the other way of accessing those schedules, right? We see this sometimes in organizations in transitions who are running 2 intranets at the same time. I know Tanis at SISV shared that with us in terms of their old intranet decayed over time and eventually disappeared. So what's your intranet's relative advantage? How has it improved over the previous generation? Compatibility, how does the innovation get assimilated into the individual's life? Here I think we really just need to pay attention to how work gets done in the organization, right? This relies on things like observational research and making sure you align your content, communication, and collaboration with job functions and how people really do their work. Make it really easy for people to adopt and assimilate because, they can now do what they used to do, but it takes them 5 steps less, and it's on the intranet and everyone can access it as opposed to buried in some file system on a file share somewhere, what have you. Be a technology steward. It's more than just training, right? I mean, it's more it's sitting down with people. It's demonstrating what you can do with it. It's sort of doing that personal time. We spent time with one organization where face-to-face meetings were super, super important. And instead of trying to get rid of them entirely, which was impossible obviously, we asked ourselves, how can we use the intranet to help make face-to-face meetings better? So if this culture is all about face-to-face meetings, what can we do to kind of help that along the way? So, we talked about sections of content about how to run an effective meeting, better meeting scheduling tools, meeting agenda templates, right? There's lots of ways to make it compatible with the way things get done and provide value there. Complexity and simplicity, well, we're trying here to make our software as easy to use as possible, and we'll be doing another release soon with some usability improvements as well. On your side, it's about designing easily readable content. How do you create your content in a way that's scannable, writing for the web? We're firm believers here clearly in usability testing, your information architecture. Ephraim did a great talk a couple of years ago at SISV about creating small group spaces that work, setting up sort of these little template spaces for people that are, again, easy to use. And of course, tending the garden, right, weeding and pruning and continuously improving your intranet to ensure that that value is sustained over time and it continues to be simple for people to use as it grows and thrives. Trialability, we mentioned updating your profile page in the past is a great example of a baby step. I think we learned that quite a while ago. Penn State, in the case study there, which we often refer to, that was a great example of people going on for that first time and updating their profile page, leaving a comment on someone else's page. What they did was they made it safe, right? They made it okay for people to just do something really simple that wasn't high risk, and they let people experiment. And it's not just experimenting with the tool or the technology or learning how to edit a page, it's doing it in public, right? Or doing it in full view of everybody else in your organization. Thomas Vanderwall coined the expression social comfort to describe this. It's beyond just like the mechanics of how do I add a tag or how do I move a page or how do I edit a page. It's how do I ensure I'm not making myself look stupid using this technology in front of an audience of my coworkers and peers. So maybe personal sandboxes underneath your profile page, maybe a corporate-wide sandbox for testing or playing or something that's a bit more social and non-serious and non-mission critical. We've seen this again, the profile photo information cascade. IntraWest, like client 0 for us when we first built HotFarmer, they changed their profile pictures one day. One guy decided to change it to Magnum PI, Tom Selleck, and then somebody else changed theirs to another 80s character from Magnum PI, and by the end of the day, like some 200 people had changed their profile photos to their favorite 80s TV people, right? So they were clearly, it was all about trialability at that point, right? They were playing with it before they did something serious. Playing with it again, Comic Sans Day, Joey and Dan at SISV talked about how they changed Mountain Equipment Co-op's font one day to be Comic Sans was the default, much to the chagrin of some of the designers there. We thought that was quite good. Finally, observability of the 5 factors. So the activity stream, comments, status updates. It's interesting because the social intranet is an inherently observable tool, right? You can see what's going on inside your organization. For you, I think it's about working the network and finding influencers, right? Who are these influential people in your organization? And trying to get them working on the intranet. This is where having a community manager, I believe, is really useful, someone whose job it is to keep up to date with the social dynamics in your organization. Pick high visibility projects or high influential projects, try and support their usage, find out what's compatible with what they're trying to do on their project. use the homepage to amplify the visibility of this desired behavior. Kudos to your staff, recognition, write articles about people, doing innovative things in the organization, and hopefully using the intranet to make it happen as well. Recognition through commenting, right, giving a sense to people that you're watching sort of what they're doing in a good way, not like a surveillant kind of creepy sort of way. And get your leadership to use it as well if you can, or a influential leader again. And their appearance in the system and their commenting on pages will have an effect, right? It will signal to other staff that, wow, our VP or our C-level, executive is using this thing. That's amazing. Like, I can observe him using it. I'm using it as well too. It will have an effect for sure. So those are some ideas going through Roger's sort of 5 factors. The bottom line for us is, you're going to have to experiment, and really your organization is different than everyone else's in its own unique way, right? There is no one-size-fits-all. But hopefully Everett Rogers' 5 factors gives you a great starting point and one that's theoretically sound to boot, right? Finally, the last sort of model I just want to introduce here is think about your users as customers and adopt kind of a marketing orientation, right? Put on your marketing hat. That might be uncomfortable for some of you, but every new customer needs to go through some sort of life cycle where they become aware of your intranet, right? You get them for that visit for that first time. You get them to do something you want them to do, right? There's some sort of conversion that happens. And then you keep them there over time as a repeat customer, hopefully becoming an intranet booster or an advocate along the way and helping you with your reach efforts. So, this reach, acquire, convert, retain, and advocate cycle is a really great way of thinking about the life cycle of your users, going from sort of novice first-timer to, passionate advocate and helping you gain other people in your organization with their voluntary behavior. So your iPad idea might be a really good quick hit to boost your reach and acquisition, right, in terms of getting people to come to your site for that first time, to come to your intranet and see what's there. But don't think that if there's no substance, right, there's no value there, it's going to keep them around converting and sticking for the long run. So in summary, what kind of usage are we trying to encourage? I think it's not uncommon to have a mixture of both mandatory and voluntary tasks at play in your social intranet. Make sure you're paying attention to what's mandatory and what's a voluntary task. For the mandatory ones, you're hopefully working with more algorithmic tasks, right? You can incent these and perhaps rely on some good old-fashioned carrots and sticks to get people onto the intranet. But for the voluntary ones, you're dealing with more heuristic tasks. You can't simply drive adoption like you drive cattle, and you may not be able to incent people, right? You're going to have to appeal to sort of that internal motivation. You're going to need to align with a higher sense of purpose and their whole reason for why they want to work in your organization. The voluntary adoption, though, again, is where that great nonlinear value creation lies. So, it's the hardest because it is voluntary, but it is also the most beneficial. So your job as an intranet manager, it's not about driving adoption. It's about diffusing innovation throughout your organization. Work the network, right? Think about Roger's 5 factors. What are your relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, simplicity, trialability, and observability? And again, these are great because you're asked to sort of think about the technology through the eyes of your staff, right? What is the relative advantage of my intranet to this person or to this type of employee? And there's a great call for creating personas for your intranet to understand those different types of users. That's a great technique. So it's not going to be the same for everybody, but hopefully you're going to put on your research hat and your marketer hat, go out there, understand what motivates people, understand that mandatory and voluntary task dynamic, and hopefully you'll find yourself and your users enjoying the benefit that genuine spontaneity can bring to your organization. And you won't have to ask for it. It just will happen, just like any good 10-year-old overnight success story. All right. Thanks for listening. It's about 10 after the hour, and I'm going to hand it back to Chris, and we can do some questions and answers.
Thanks, Gordon. So type your questions into the little question panel in the GoToWebinar control box, and you could also alternatively use the hashtag TFAdoption on Twitter if you want to enter questions that way. One of the things that your presentation reminded me of Gord, a practical implementation of adoption techniques was, do you remember at IDEO, they set up monitors in their cafeterias, and when people updated their status in Thought Farmer, it bubbled up to a monitor in the cafeterias or the common areas. So that it was like a big grid of faces that they designed themselves, and then using a direct connection to the Thought Farmer database, when somebody updated their status, then that person zoomed to the center and their status update ballooned. And well, in your little grid there, I guess that's an example of making your innovation observable. Is that right, Gord?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, IDEO, clearly a pretty clever organization, and I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, that's a great way of bringing something which is pretty invisible. You know, it doesn't have a physical presence in the same way that some other innovation might have inside your organization. Yeah, and making it observable to everyone, and in a just kind of a background sort of way, right? And people would go and interact with it. They'd touch the person's face as well too. That was the second part of that big touchscreen installation. And it would flip over and it would tell you who that person is and where they worked. And of course, IDEO also fighting the sort of geographic divide amongst all of their different offices. That was a great way too of making it feel like, you know, they were one company and not, you know, multiple studios. So yeah, they did. That was a really great sort of innovation from them to make it observable and make it visible. Yeah.
Another one that comes to mind is at Mountain Equipment Co-op. Staff, the stores have kiosks throughout, computer kiosks, and at those stores, staff can go on. Is that right, Gord? Have you seen that?
Yep, they have in-store kiosks. I was in one day actually asking about a product, and the staff person said, just a sec. And they went over to the kiosk, and they alt-tabbed out of their green screen inventory system, and they popped onto Mondo. And she looked up some product information that was stored on their intranet. And I said, how do you like Mondo? She said, oh, great. Look, there's some birthday cake contest going on right now on the homepage. Have you seen this? And I said, no, I haven't. And we had this great conversation about the use of Mondo on the retail floor. I don't think she realized I worked for Thought Farmer at the time, but anyways, it was fun to see it in use and in action on the floor. So.
Yeah, so Mondo is the name of Mountain Equipment Co-op's Thought Farmer installation, and that's important if you've got staff who don't sit in front of computers. Obviously, they can only adopt the intranet if they can get to it, and you make that possible either through kiosks or through home access or through mobile access. And this is something that we might want to mention. Is that we're surprised that the Thought Farmer's mobile version is fantastic. It's an unbelievable mobile client. I use it constantly when I'm on the go. We've been disappointed with how few clients are actually using it. So ask yourself, are you using the mobile version of Thought Farmer? And if not, why not? If your IT people have said, for some reason, you know, we can't make it available because of this or this, push on it, because that's a huge adoption thing. If you can get it so that you can get to your social intranet wherever you are, either at home or from your mobile device, that's big. And Mountain Equipment Co-op, whom we mentioned there, they saw a big spike. That's when their spike in usage. Now, for them, it's not the mobile version yet, but they went from 54% of average employees accessing the intranet weekly to 87% over a four-month period. It was either 4 or 6 months after they rolled out access to Thought Farmer at home. So no adoption can take place if people can't get to the intranet, right?
It's a big jump for sure. We got a question here from Marcel. What influence involvement of numerous people within the organization in some way or another at the planning phase before launch has on initial enthusiasm and advocacy once the intranet has launched? So I'll try and sort of do my best to interpret that question, Marcel. I think getting people involved and getting all sorts of different people from across the organization involved in the launch phase, hopefully from what we've seen, I think from our client launches in the past, it instills a sense of ownership and a sense of responsibility in many of those people, and they have sort of a vested stake in the ongoing success of the intranet. They become that, I use the expression technology steward, right? They often have an ongoing role after the intranet is launched in being, oh yeah, you were involved with that project. You were the ones that got it up and running. Like, you know a lot about this. And they become those nodes in the network, as it were, that can help continue to foster, usage, can basically answer questions and hopefully help other people, start using the intranet as well too. And again, that advice or that help or that assistance or that advocacy type role in the organization is going to vary. Some people are more technical than others. Some people might not be very technical, but they've found the intranet very useful to manage their miniature, community of practice in a particular area. Again, that usage is going to vary from people to people, but I think if you spread that involvement throughout the organization and have some sort of cross-functional or cross-divisional group, that your chances of kind of stimulating the network and diffusing the innovation through the network, to think about the network diagram that we saw before, is much increased. So
we have Shannon just on Twitter tweeted that she's interested in this notion of observability. What about putting a blog roll of employee blogs on the homepage, she suggested?
Yeah, that would certainly be a great idea. I'm trying to think of one of our clients that does that right now. I'm not sure I've seen any, to be honest, to date. Chris, have you seen any in your demos?
Employee blogs or blog rolls on the homepage?
Blog rolls on the, well, or either actually. I mean, I think we've seen employee blogs, but from a blog roll standpoint on the homepage.
Yeah, well, I think that'd be exciting. And if you have employees actually updating, running blogs, that's a great sign that that adoption has taken hold. Yeah. If you can get somebody at, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, you finish your thought, Chris. We got another question. I was just going to.
Sure. I was just going to say, if you can get senior employees blogging, that's especially powerful, because it tells the company that it's okay to use this. It's okay to share your thoughts in this forum. If there is no participation from at the executive level, then that will always harm adoption to some degree, because people may think, maybe it's not okay. Maybe if I share my thoughts here on this intranet, it'll be perceived as wasting time. So if your executives, if multiple executives can participate and show that it's okay, and that rather that it's desired behavior, that certainly helps adoption.
Yeah, Dan's asked a really good question, and one I think that's quite controversial, or at least I think it's controversial, and that is, any thought of gamifying Thought Farmer to encourage adoption, like badges and achievements on Stack Overflow sites? So for those of you not familiar with this trend, and it's quite big right now in Enterprise 2.0 circles, the sort of notion of gamification, or introducing game-like mechanics into systems of engagement to encourage exactly this sort of behavior and adoption that we're talking about. I mean, I personally have my take on it, and I've been long overdue for a blog post about this, is that I believe that sort of badges and achievements is an extrinsic motivation technique, right? It's a reward. It's some sort of social status inside your organization. I think there's two things that are going on there that I find challenging. One is that the social status inside your organization outside of the intranet is perhaps already codified through things like titles, job titles, pay grades, and other compensation mechanisms inside the organization, right? And I think if you introduce a new form of recognition and a new form of status, you have to ensure, if you are going to do it, and you do believe it's effective, you have to very much ensure that those things are in line, right? So I would actually say that, you know, your HR folks and the people who think about compensation policy would need to be involved in the implementation of that. Because the worst thing that you'd have is you have somebody with like a super rock star, amazing, you know, X number of achievements and all these badges or whatever, and they might not be, they're making half of what somebody else who's not participating whatsoever has, right? You've just introduced yet another complicated dynamic inside your organization's culture around it. I also think too that again, badges and achievements and Stack Overflow type sites and that model of extrinsic motivation kind of can backfire because it can, certain people respond to it better, right? Certain people respond a lot better to those sort of carrot and stick type things. I mean, we've set up intrinsic and extrinsic motivation as the sort of polar opposites on one side of a spectrum or another. It is kind of gray, though, and that depends, again, on these sort of algorithmic and heuristic tasks that we're talking about. So you know, again, we have gamification inside of organizations right now. It's called like incentives or bonuses or paychecks. Introducing a social layer on top of that, I think, I don't think it's been thought through well enough yet, and I think it could suggest sort of that, yeah, it could be just as demotivating for some employees as motivating for others. So that's my try in a nutshell. There's a long overdue blog post of my part from that. So there is with the TIC, with the Thought Farmer integration kit, we did sort of goof around with badges internally here. I think I had somebody in the office had the curmudgeon badge at one point on the intranet, which I think was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke that one of the developers did. So, but you have to.
I think if you never participate, we rewarded you with the curmudgeon badge automatically, right?
That's what it was. Yeah. So. So Dan, I hope that answered your question. A good conversation though, not one that I've seen a lot, because I think a lot of the enterprise too and these conferences and stuff, everyone's like, yeah, we're going to gamify your intranet. It's like the latest buzzword. So I'm personally a bit of a skeptic on it, but there you go.
If you do have a strong vision for it, do note that it is possible to introduce something like that using the Thought Farmer integration kit. Quite simply, you've got a little portlet that you would put perhaps on people's profile pages, and when the page loads, it just has a quick look tallying up, say, how many comments or how many edits they've made in the past X number of days, and then if it sees that they've reached a certain threshold, it applies an image. And so that can all be done via the Thought Farmer integration kit if you believe that it's the right thing to do for your company, if you have a strong vision on how to go about implementing it. I'm just going to check Twitter here, make sure we don't have any other questions. So it looks like we've addressed all of it. Well, we'd sure like to thank you all for attending today, and thank you, Gord, for all the thought that went into this presentation. I hope this becomes a blog post, because I would like to reference all these publications and read them. Well, not the boring ones, but the exciting ones that you talked about. I'd like to read those. If it gets too dry and theoretical, my brain shuts off.
Fair enough, and I am the theory guy in the office, I guess. But the whole point, of course, is we can give you a bunch of practical tips on how to do it, but practice without theory sort of doesn't scale. And what we're trying to do is give you some fundamental concepts, a couple of constructs that you can hopefully work through and ask yourself, right, is this voluntary? Is it mandatory? Is it algorithmic? Is it heuristic? Do I need to use intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? And what are my 5 factors? And with that, you've kind of got a more robust toolbox that you can then take and apply into your own organization. So hopefully the theory part, if you wade through it, results for some pretty practical and pretty powerful recommendations for diffusing innovation and not driving adoption.
Well, thanks a lot, Gord. And for those of you who are interested, go to youtube.com/thoughtfarmer later on today or tomorrow, and this recorded webinar will be there for your enjoyment, or go to helpdesk.thoughtfarmer.com and slot off the first Wednesday of May in the morning for our next client webinar. And we don't know exactly what the topic is, but a little hint, it may be about a new release. So, so slot that off. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.